we're going to focus our attention on the best practices for addressing the problem of gender-based hate speech. I'm going to leave aside the description of the problem and focus on solutions. I want to start off with some questions to the speakers, and then I'll later open up so that the audience can come with their questions as well. I want to start with you, John. You are in a unique position of working at an institute for hate studies. With the Ombud's eyes, or even eyes from Norway, this is quite incredible that one has an institutionalization of research and teaching on such things as hate speech and hate crime. And my question to you, and this might be difficult because many people, not everybody sees maybe the connection between what people do in their research and real world. And so I want to put a question to you. Can you give me an example? Now, this doesn't have to come from your own institute. It can come from other institutes that you are aware of that have come out with findings of research findings or whatever. But can you give me an example of how research findings have either led to a policy change regarding addressing of hate speech, or have led to at least important proposal of policy change? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. I guess I should say that, feel free to admit this, I don't think that the folks who got the Institute for Hate Studies at Gonzaga University, my old university, I don't think they quite had the vision of what was possible and what could become. They were just responding to a widespread but largely regional problem of white supremacist activity, and then trying to get at root causes as it was affecting that region, as it was affecting students at the area universities, as high school students were being recruited into supremacist organizations and things like that. It was sort of years later in a different iteration that it turned into, let's shift this to a more sort of scholarly and practitioner-engaged area of study about the problem of hate. So we've been very fortunate as the endeavor has grown that others have taken it up as well and moved it along and seen it as connected to what they're interested in and just widened the conversation. I think that there's a lot of examples out there of people who are doing work from criminology and victimology, that they're working with law enforcement, they're working with ministries of justice and so on trying to come up with or implement best practices for assisting and empowering victims of hate crimes and hate speech to report more, to formulate their own definitions of hate, to try to push back on local level or national legislation, to change people that are not exactly satisfied with where the line has been drawn, that it hasn't included enough, it hasn't really spoken to their experiences. So that's very important. I would say, specifically regarding hate speech, one of the greatest contributions from academics, and it came from people who were pioneers in the area called critical race theory, which came out of law and sociology and a few other things, but was really driven by legal scholars initially. And that was the attempt to create university policies to deal with hateful and assaultive speech. And it was highly contested. We're going back 3 decades now, highly contested. But the results continue to flow. We have more expectation and more policy and even federal engagement on this, on creating safe campuses. So probably the pinnacle example, and we're still sorting all of this out, we're still working it out, and it is contested, but we have the utilization of existing federal law in the United States, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, which is about gender equity in educational environments, both public and private, that receive federal funding. So high schools, colleges, right? And for about 40 years, this has been a very sort of narrow focus. It's been about promoting gender equity, and it's largely been tracked down into athletics and extracurricular activities and equitable resource allocation. Well, the Obama administration did something really remarkable. It said, hey, look, we've got this law that's about non-discrimination and equality, and we've got this problem on our college campuses of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct and just problems of gender inequality more generally. And federal funding is tied to this, so let's start pushing on this problem. And I think all of this is ultimately connected to the early work on trying to get campus codes of conduct regarding hate speech. And we can't underestimate the fact that President Obama himself was a law student, taught law, and has quite a background in critical race theory himself.
Thank you. This one goes to Ina and Kristine. You're both researchers. I know that you have both your own research findings, and I just want to ask, I know that at the end of your products that you have researched and written, you do come both with proposals for what we can do, how can we go forward in addressing this problem of hate speech. And I was wondering if you could just kind of try to tie that to research findings. It doesn't have to be your own research findings, but in your research that you've done, research findings, try to tie some of the proposals that you have made, at least a couple examples of the proposals you have made for how we can move forward to connect that up to, okay, where did that come from? What did we see in the finding of the research that prompted that this could be something to work for? Both of you, yes.
Can you start?
I like starting. That makes it sound like I have the ideas first. Okay. I think the first thing, in terms of future research and what we need to do, is I've been working with topics like sexual harassment. There's so much subjectivity. There's so many accounts of, well, my boss doesn't believe me, am I the only one? Which indicates that we do need research to establish how often it's happening. It's a collective problem. I think research, together with a lot of social media campaigns like in Norway, Ombud, also equivalent of everyday sexism globally. We need these to make sure that it's a collective identity, because without it we can't move forward. From my own research, I also see that there is there's a simple need for moderation. This problem, when it's sometimes painted like in shadows and very dark and mysterious, like no, it's not, it's people misbehaving. And you need rules, and you need sanctions, and you need someone doing it. It's not necessarily such a mystical thing, it just needs to be recognized as a problem, and we need people moderating. In terms of, I've been working specifically with games, and for me, my recommendation to every game company in the future is, if your intention is to have a game that is online, you're going to need people to manage that community. You're going to need community guidelines about what is allowed and what is not, and you're going to need people who enforce it. It's not really a mystery, but apparently there must be somewhat mysterious, even so few people have been able to think of it themselves, and so few people do. I think that's my two main things.
Very good answer. Okay, so I'll try to elaborate. I think, to me, when I do this kind of studies, it starts off with a very strong feeling of someone has to do something. Someone has to find this data, and then I can't see anyone doing it, okay, I'll do it. And that motivation is, of course, not just descriptive. It's like I want to do something, I want to change. the state of affairs. And so that is like motivation that, you know, in the end of the research phase, when you think, okay, I have all this amazing data, and some of them are really surprising, like findings that are surprising. I think it's the most, I feel even better to actually propose actions when I find that I didn't know that managers in Norwegian media, 85% of the media organizations do not have any formalized support systems for harassment against their journalists. I was like, what? Seriously? So I need to propose that this should be in place, because it's actually part of the work environment law that we have, that you should, you know, have this in place. So what I like to propose action. And I think it's really important that we as researchers dare to do that, and to be political as well.
I'm just going to follow. I never know how to shut up. But and I think, and I have very much the same experience, that doing research that everyone expects we have been doing for decades. And it's like, no, we're pioneering this. Like what? People bullying each other on the internet. You're kind of pioneering that kind of research. It is a problem about where our research funding is going. Currently, all our politicians believe that we need to have more people knowing maths, so they can have more engineers to build things that we need for more oil, or something. The point is there's barely any research funding to study these problems. And we do research mostly on like tiny grants. Like the research project I got, we had 3 months of paid work for that. The rest we took from our own free time, because we're so passionate about it. I mean, it's horrible work conditions. It has to do with political will. And a lot of the time we conclude that really just the simple things like, well, we need to have someone caring about sexual harassment. It's amazing that there's so many things that can be done, just a little bit of resources there. Sorry.
And, no, just jump in. and I actually have a follow-up to Ina on, because I know that in Ina's project, she did do the breakdown. We've been talking a little bit back and forth about intersectionality. She did do the breakdown regarding age and gender. All right, now, I'm the first one I've worked with intersectionality mostly on micro level at the Ombud. I know the difficulty of trying to work with intersectionality on a macro level. That is where you try to influence a lot out there in terms of policy. And so, I just want to ask you, with the finding you did have on age and gender, that it was the young women that were receiving most hate speech, it was the older men that were receiving most hate speech. What if you were to try to tie that to a proposal for a recommendation? Is there anything that you could give in terms of, did you manage to come up with any recommendation that captured the intersectionality that you did find?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, when it came to age, it's probably not that surprising that young women get more, but still, it's such a strong finding that what I propose is that, of course, when you notice that the young journalists that are just out of school, they get so much more threat when they're female than their male counterparts, then you need for both the journalism school to actually teach about this, and that's not happening today. You need the journalist students to be prepared for this, both to be prepared when you're a female journalist going out there, and that's why I talk so much about the shock, is that if you learn this in school, if you are prepared, you don't have to get speech injuries. And same for the male journalists, because they have a responsibility of not trivializing their female colleagues' experiences. So that's one proposal, is that the journalism schools need to get up there now. The other is, of course, to the employers. I said that this is a labor issue, this is a workplace issue. The managers here are responsible for their workers, and when you know that when you hire a young female journalist in the age of 25 and 35, it's very likely that she'll be harassed. then you need to be prepared. You need to have systems ready, and you need to take it seriously. And that's just two very simple things that can be changed like tomorrow, today, even.
Okay, Jamia, you are an unapologetic activist. This is what you do it well. And in the US, of course, it's a very different context than little Norway with its 5 million people. And I was wondering first, in your ears, does it sound far-fetched when you hear us in Norway talk about proposing solutions such as hate speech has to be on the curriculum in schools, has to be taught in the schools? Does that sound far-fetched? Should we be focusing more, and I know that this is not either ors, but should we be focusing more on getting media businesses to see that it's within their own interests to avoid hate speech? Of course, that's a little bit easier with advertisers because advertisers don't want to be associated with negativity. A little bit more difficult if you're talking about moderating a media comment section where there are no advertisers. A little bit more difficult to get them to see that it's in your interest as a business media organization to actually promote a place that's not considered to be a kind of a cesspool where people won't want to go. And then a final question is, what happens when the research shows that in the equality section, I would say that diversity doesn't pay? What if that shows that? And if I were to bring it over to hate speech, what Kristine pointed out that this guy sold for lots of money after he started an aggressive hate speech. What if research shows that it actually pays to do the hate speech? Anyway.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of food for thought. So what I'll say first is there's research that shows that social emotional learning being taught to young people is one of the very important solutions that we need to end bullying, but also online harassment and abuse in general. So there are foundations that are now actually getting that connection, that are funding work to support activists who are, one of my founders actually, to support work that supports activists who are working to end violence against women and girls, and also actively have another strategic philanthropic area focused on social emotional learning. Because they understand that when you're teaching young people compassion, when you're teaching them about creating cultures with open communication and handling your disputes in respectful ways, that leads to creating a culture where this sort of thing happens less and then hopefully doesn't happen at all. So I think that curriculum in schools is absolutely paramount, and that's one of the reasons why I allocate a lot of my time to speaking in schools, because I think that it's really important. And just like what Christina was saying earlier, that I thought that vulnerability was great when she talked about herself in the World of Warcraft game, that Zoe Quinn has probably said herself that when she was a teenager and going through some of the insecurities that we all have, like my teenage years, if I were judged for everything I said during my teenage years, it would not be a good look also, but that she was also participating in the speech back and forth that was negative and looking at the reasons why she was doing it. And I think that that's also really valuable for us to talk about what kinds of conditions systemically lead toward people feeling like this is a way that they need to get attention, that this is a way that they need to assert themselves in order to be seen in society and to address those systems. About Norway specifically, I feel like there's so much for us to learn. So when I heard the conversation about workplaces being responsible for workplace environment, I was like in my head, I wish I brought my computer here so I could take a note about my strategic plan for next year. I'm so on this. Because workplace bullying in the United States has become a movement that's been very hard for people to get behind. And so there's only a few states that are focused on that now, and it's like hate speech, where it has to be very egregious for people to be able to make a claim, and specifically around this sort of harassment. So it sparked a fire in me to think, oh, now we can go after media companies around how they're protecting the journalists inside. Hey, that's 2016 on the agenda, thank you for that. And then two, the fact that in Norway that you already have these systems in place that allow for that to be, like when you said, oh, that's easy, you could do that tomorrow, we could add this extra thing, I was thinking, oh my gosh, you know, it's hard for us to get guns off the street, which seems probably very clear to everyone in this room, right, in America, but I was thinking that it'd be just as hard as getting guns off the street to convince people that this is a priority that they need to put into their working spaces, but I'm willing to go for it, because I never thought I'd see a black president in my lifetime, but I did, and worked to help elect him, so I think that, you know, that just, I was learning a lot from you and like what's possible, what's been made possible in Norway, keeping in mind that the historical conditions, the demographics are very different than the United States, that you guys are leading in a way that we can learn from, and that's very inspiring. And then the question about the money, the bottom line about people saying, show me the money, what's in it for me? Why should I care about this hate speech issue if there's no research that shows that I have to do this or that there's no way that I gain or look good for doing it? And I think that it comes down to us having to recognize what we all lose when this sort of culture is created. So for me, when I have received those arguments from people where they say words are just words and you are victimizing yourself, I'd say every day I'll get some sort of email or message on our work Facebook or in my own, where there'll be someone who'll send me an animated GIF of a laptop closing, and they'll say, there's your solution for online harassment. Or a phone closing and saying, there's your solution. Or you just want to victimize yourself because you're a woman and you're black, so you just see yourself as a victim. So if you stop seeing yourself as a victim, all this stuff will go away. It's your problem, you know? And so for me, I think that it's really about showing people like that what they have to lose from a society where this sort of thing runs rampant. So maybe they don't have the direct bottom line impact, but we can say, you know, studies are showing that this sort of like rape culture is perpetuated by online harassment. I can create a line there and then show how this sort of thing and being connected to it could be bad for their bottom line. Or talking about, you know, I see this in terms of racial justice a lot, making those claims about how at least now, the tipping point idea that Malcolm Gladwell talks about a lot, which is more like, maybe we can't change everyone's hearts and minds, even though we'd like to, but if we make it harder for people who are openly racist in work environments to be openly racist without consequences, then that's okay with me. That if it, so that you'll now even find the most virulent racists really not wanting to be called racists in the workplace because they recognize the social consequences and sometimes their job that can come with the character defamation or reputation damage that can come with those sorts of associations. So I think that it's helpful to have those sorts of conversations with people too, to kind of just say, you know, this is the accepted norm right now, we are moving toward this. If you have to abide by EEOC guidelines, and so if you're creating a space that's hostile in which women are working in, that will have an impact on your bottom line and public perceptions about your company. But I do think that we have a long way to go around that too, specifically around convincing people that it's worth their while to actually invest money into this work, and that's the struggle that I'm still trying to deal with.
Thank you. Could I follow up on
Yeah,
that just real quickly?
Because I was very intrigued by the emphasis on education and whether the focus should be on education or whether it should be on changing, say, corporate practices, things like that. And I would say that education, you know, can come in many forms and at many levels and be more formal or less formal. And far be it for me to talk about corporate strengths or competencies or things like that. But another media company that we're not talking about here is Amazon, right? It's a different kind of media company, but it has certain affinities with others, and it's taken a leadership role, arguably speaking, on highlighting issues of transgender identity and experience and navigating family and social constraints and conditions, etc. And has been recognized that the show that Amazon created and streams, Transparent, has been geez, I'm blanking on the industry award. Help me out here. It's not Oscars. It's Emmys. There we go. It's won multiple Emmys. It's sort of groundbreaking, and it's targeting an audience that probably is coming to thinking about these issues for the first time, basically. But it's promoting a lot more understanding, awareness, etc. And so here's a nice connection between doing good and doing well, and promoting education through entertainment. There's tremendous creativity that can be shown by Silicon Valley companies and others, and these are creative people anyway. It's I think doing some of the inroads work that you all are doing, and sort of widening the conversation, the scope of what they're thinking about, looking at, dare I say it, having some background in gender studies, things like that, to sort of close that gap and see policy making and education and entertainment as all potentially linked.
And I just wanted to follow up on that, because you got all my fires were going about this too, but what you said about Amazon makes a case for why it's a both and with the education and the policy piece, because Amazon came under fire recently because of workplace conditions and people feeling overworked, and then women who were being fired for having cancer, that sort of thing, or there was a correlation between, I don't know that I can say distinctively that's where they were fired, but the cases were made that they were getting all these accolades for being this really positive place to work. There were people who were saying that they didn't get coverage, and they were working for this really rich company that was doing all these other great things. And so when you said that, I was thinking about how important it is for us to have the dual prong approach, right? To have the education, and then also to be approaching these people as policymakers, because that was a part of the Facebook fight also, was to say, you are such a leader in these other ways around, talking about youth and internet safety. Can we treat women with the same regard when we talk about this issue, that you are leaders, so we are inviting you to lead also in this way, where you are falling behind. And so I'm glad you mentioned that too, because we have to have both.
Thank you, and I want to follow up with something also again to both Kristine and Ivan. When I heard Kristine talk, I got your description of the problem. I got the image that here we're seeing it crystal clear. Something that Ina also talked about as in describing her problem, more general for journalists and bloggers and stuff, and a little bit less clear. And I want to give you an example. You both talked about cyber mob, this organized groups attacking people, almost a hate campaign. With gaming, you see it so crystal clear. With other types of hate speech regarding journalists and bloggers, you see it also happening there. It's just not quite as clear as with the gaming. The same kind of thing happened with this feeling, the description that you had about the, both had basically about they want to feel that there are different norms here. Just like in the commentary sections, many people feel that it's okay to be hard-hitting and take a little aggressive tone here and stuff like that. So it's both. So you're a little bit in really being able to give us the picture clear. I feel that regarding an answer to how we address specifically this kind of organized aggressive hate campaign, that must be particularly difficult. And I want to kind of get your feelings about, okay, how can we really address something as strong as that? Do we use different kinds of tools, different kinds of techniques, or is it just the same of what we are proposing in all areas of hate speech, addressing hate speech?
Okay. Well, I think that in my material, that I think among Norwegian journalists, it's like you said, it's like the demography is like not that huge. With 5 million people, but so the cyber mob campaigns that you see against female journalists in the States are totally like, enormous in proportions compared to what we see against Norwegian journalists. There's just not that many that actually harass, which is good. But I think that what we saw, I think it was last summer against Sissel Wold in NRK and the TV2 reporter this week on Twitter, that was the closest that I've seen to be like an organized mob actually managing to exhaust the journalists to such an extent that they leave Twitter, that they leave social media. So I think we will unfortunately see more in the future, even though we don't have that many examples now. But I think this is also a reason for why it's so important that we research the harassers, that we get more knowledge on who is harassing and why, because it's not one reason for harassing, it's so many, and it's different if you're like part of a political or religious group that really go after one journalist that you disagree with, or if you're in an online community or a gaming community, or whether you're like active in the commentary section. It's not the same people and it's not the same methods, and we need to know more about that. So I forgot to put that on the top of the priority list on what we need to research now, is the people that harass and why they do.
Yes. Just give us research funding, we'll get all the answers. Right now, I want to know, like one topic that I want to pull up here is that, maybe like put it in there for later, is how anti-feminism, you can say anti-feminism as a conspiracy theory in general. That might be the biggest conspiracy theory we have now. It has huge acceptance in mainstream media, which also makes it very hard to sometimes attack or sort of meet all these accusations. That's one thing. Okay, about cyber mobs and gaming, that was your question. It's true. I think what we see in the gaming community is somehow a sort of escalated version of something that we see in many other places. This has a lot to do with how gamers are incredibly good at collective problem solving, coordinating their actions and doing it online. It is their strength, and we have an entire field of games and learning studies that tell us these are the skills gamers develop. Sadly, they are currently using it for evil now, with Gamergate. But I think that in trying to deal with something like a cyber mob, again, it is about, if we had any research, there's a lack of research, a lack of knowledge about these things that make them seem so daunting. Because when we see across, from gaming to journalists to anywhere else, we see the cyber mob attacks are fairly similar. Again, vandalizing Wikipedia pages, hacking email accounts, hacking social media, releasing private information, etc. It should not be that difficult. I've been suggesting several, to make it like a standard package that employers have or that the police have that help you. If you become the target of a cyber mob, okay, then we will have experts that will help you. We will change the setting of your privacy accounts. We will make sure that your house address is not available in a Google search, etc. Simple things that can help that individual straight away. And then we are looking at very banal things, like police knowing what you are reporting to them. This is not magic, but if you go to the police and they have no idea what you're talking about, they have no idea what doxing is, fantastic, if you just log off, you don't have any kind of justice. So in terms of doing this, I think it's very simple to build sort of like standardized packages that employers can use to keep individuals safe. We need resource groups that can help implement these, and we need to make sure that the instances that we go for to help, like for example the police, actually have any idea what these things are. And I don't think any of them necessarily require like huge amount of resources or huge amount of policy work. They're fairly self-explanatory. Like, if when I go to the police and ask for help, they should have some kind of idea what kind of help I need.
Can I just one little comment? Because what I forgot to mention is that one of the categories of harassers are other journalists. So, and I also, a lot of the people that I talk to say that actually when other journalists harass me on Twitter or on Facebook, that's when I feel the worst. Like that's really getting to me. Because it's other people with authority. And that can also take like kind of a, start feel like a campaign towards one person, but it's not the same. It's not a cybermob active.
Thank you. I have one more question for John before I open up to the audience. About a year and a half ago, when I first met John, you had a very unique idea about how one could, in some cases, use contract clauses, contract law, to actually help address and respond to hate speech. A year and a half ago, there was a specific case going in it, or incident happening in the U.S. I'm wondering if you can describe what that incident was, and tell your thought about how, in that incident, contract law was actually used to help respond to hate speech. Yes, sure.
Happy to. So, may be familiar to you because basketball is, by some accounts, the second most popular sport in the world behind soccer or football. The National Basketball Association, which is based primarily in the United States, there's one team that's in Canada, so I guess it's technically a North American organization, has a really global reach. It's engaged all over the world in various ways and is a massive multinational, multi-billion-dollar industry. And the kind of industry it is, it's franchise ownership with sort of a central governance structure, voluntary associations, law applies to it. So that's just some context. A few years ago, about 18, I think, months ago, the then owner of one of the NBA franchises, Donald Sterling, who is a billionaire, but his billions are tied to real estate deals, and by all accounts, this was not a good guy over years, just not a good guy. Was a slumlord, multiple allegations of racial discrimination in housing, sexual harassment of employees, just bad dude. And the NBA tolerated him for years and years. It was sort of an old boys club in the ownership group. They just tolerated his behaviors. Well, new commissioner came in that season that we're talking about here. There were some private recordings made in a home that Donald Sterling owned. He's having a conversation with, some have called her his personal assistant, some have called her his girlfriend. Both seem to be true. Anyway, some private communications, private conversations that were recorded, not exactly clear who recorded it, for what purpose. Ultimately, it didn't really matter because it quickly got out into the public. It got out to tabloid online journalism, TMZ. And with Donald Sterling being a public figure, which is very important in American constitutional law for having all sorts of protections, or not, being a public figure had a lesser expectation of privacy, and, well, the court of public opinion got to hear what was on those recordings, which was some pretty ugly, racist stuff about his customer base, about black people in general. And this is in a sport, in an industry that there's a very high presence of black employees, right? So the outcry was pretty quick, pretty strong, pretty unanimous, and something very interesting happened. The new commissioner of the National Basketball Association, kind of testing out his powers and setting a new tone, a new day, in, I think, his second set of official remarks about this, condemned Donald Sterling's hateful remarks, and basically said they have no place in our business. They have no place in this huge, multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation. Okay, great, but what does that mean? People were wondering, okay, is there going to be anything behind this? Is there going to be any sort of real sanction? Well, to fast forward through the whole process, Donald Sterling was eventually forced to sell his ownership stake in the team. He was forced out of ownership in the NBA. So Now, this took a while because, again, billionaire owner and a lawyer and highly litigious. He had grown his empire and settled lots of cases against him because he was a lawyer, and that's how he dealt with things. But the NBA, being staffed sort of at the highest levels with some pretty sound legal minds as well, went looking for grounds to force him to sell his ownership. So through processes of voting among the Board of Governors, and going back into the agreement that he signed when he first became an owner, and looking at the articles of governance, so voluntary associations law, there were enough clauses in there that they could actually vote him out and force him to sell his interest. Most importantly,
you call it a moral clause?
There was a morals clause in the contract that he signed when he first became an owner 30-odd years earlier. Now, morals clauses are part of the boilerplate of employment contracts. Nobody pays attention to these. They don't get enforced, but they're there. And people often ask me, why are they there? Because if you do things that reflect poorly on your employer, they can use it against you, or in this case, in terms of your voluntary association, they can use it against you. Well, that's what happened. So this was fascinating, and it just kind of opened up a door of another way of looking at these things, that we can look at the correlation between doing good and doing well, and we can say, look, times change, and a critical mass can develop, and people say, look, I don't want to put up with this anymore. I don't want to consume this product anymore. I don't want this to be what I'm associated with. And through all sorts of other legal channels, so through contract law, through property law, voluntary associations, employment law, many other things, there are ways of getting at all this. And I find that fascinating. There's a lot to be worked out here. But I think it's also the kind of thing that Jamia has been pushing on successfully with the companies that she's engaged. Look, they have their own community standards, codes of conduct for utilizing their services. If you're talking about a software company, you purchase software, you're a license holder. That's it. It's their product. It's their property. And so they do get to say, this is how we want something used or not want it used. So that's important as well. There's all these legal tools that are ways of getting at these things, and creative minds can accomplish a lot.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I want to open up now to the audience, questions in the audience. Tara, you going to go around with the mic?
Yeah.
And, but I just wanted that to kind of be heard, that story, so that you can see that we do have many, many different possibilities, possible ways of trying to address hate speech. Yeah. Okay. Questions? Anybody from the floor? Yeah. First, Eirik, and then.
Hello, my name is Eirik. I have a question for Jamia and maybe John, if you want to sort of complement each other's answer. You were saying about the workplace, the situation in America, that there are no sort of regulations to sort of combat hate speech in the workplace, as I understood you, Jamia.
Well, there are regulations. I just think it's got to be really egregious and well documented in order to win.
Yeah.
So,
because when we were looking at my organization's ethical guidelines, when you look up sort of like how to write ethical guidelines, you always have these try in Norway not to lean too heavily on American guidelines because they are very specific due to sort of the system of damages in court and suing, basically, which is maybe a stereotype of the American court system in that regard. But you know, story short, American ethical guidelines for organizations, businesses, etc., are extremely detailed, and my impression is that that is so that you can't go and say that the organization or this business did not sort of cover this in their guidelines, so it's the individual who is at fault. But my question is, could one use the very sort of harsh potential of being sort of sentenced with damages? Could you use sort of litigation as a political tool when there is a breach in a workplace?
Well, so I'm not a lawyer, but so I want you to talk about the legal piece, but what I do know is there has been conversation about the power of class action lawsuits brought by women to these tech companies and what that would look like if that were to be organized. And so I do think, then I actually have a friend who does some work. She's been really involved in winning cases around revenge porn and cyber exploitation. And she is all about the power of suing. Like the other day when we were in a meeting, she was kind of like, y'all, we just need to start suing some people that can help fund your work, that research funding that you need. Let's go do that. And so I do think, jokingly, I'm American, but I grew up abroad, so I do kind of see it as the American way, in some ways as like a way that you can get those damages. And so there has been conversation around that and what would it look like. I think that sort of suit would have to be very, very well organized. And I also think that the court of public opinion and the media and how women are shredded many times in that sort of environment because it is so toxic would need to be factored in terms of the kind of support that the people who would be in such a suit would need, because we can look at cases like Ellen Howe at Reddit and how she was driven out for talking about sexual harassment and fighting back against that, and also for being the first person to really push for anti-harassment policies in such a big way. She was just treated in such dehumanizing ways online. And there's change.org petitions that a lot of these online abusers were using to organize against her and to create trouble for her publicly and for her organization. And then, speculation is that she was pushed out, she resigned. So I think I like that you're talking about this because I do think it's another channel that is being looked at that is going to be effective in one way. Do I think that it's going to be systemically effective in terms of changing a culture? No, but I definitely think it could get us closer to that tipping point.
One of the most important things that you learn in law school is the lawyer's dodge. That is reframing a question, not quite answering it head on, things like that. I don't mean to invoke that here, but I'm going to invoke it here. The hypothetical that you've given, it raises some further questions, like is this a public employer, is it a private employer, what size dimension, what's the employer liability structure, is there an indemnity clause, an indemnification relationship where the employer is responsible for protecting you, legally speaking, within the capacity of your duties? Was this something that falls outside of the performance of your capacity, of your duties, etc.? I guess, so there's that, and then the other thing that I would say, and you never know this by the fact that we have the world's largest incarceration system and the highest percentage of incarcerated population and all that, but we generally prefer to do things through civil law rather than criminal law. So there are a lot of modes of relief that involve individual to individual or organization to organization, right? And that presents certain challenges because, quite honestly, these things can turn into who has the deepest pockets, right? Who can afford this process, either to fend it off or to press their rights, or who has someone who's going to step forward and take their case and just take a contingency fee and sort of not only believes in it that much, but also can afford to not necessarily get paid if it doesn't turn out. And that turns out actually to be a pretty important area of hate speech law as well. Some folks have talked about this in the context of group defamation lawsuits, and how group defamation actions have actually been used to suppress academic freedom and silence publication and things like that. And it is often the case that the powerful are utilizing the legal tools that are available to them and have the resources to do it, to tamp down on legitimate free expression.
And I'm glad you mentioned the money.
Folks, we have 3 other questions in the pipeline, all the way back to Elizabeth and back. And if the questioners can kind of keep the questions a little bit limited, and also the answers a little bit limited. Yes.
Hi, it's Elizabeth again. I just have a quick question, and it is actually when do we give up? This is a very pessimistic question. And that is concerning, in Norway we have a discussion about, like, in the newspapers, you can argue for days under the articles. And crazy people, including myself, do that for hours and days. And then a lot of newspapers, they started to more and more, they don't want to have a debate under the articles, and now there's been a debate about should we just not have it at all, because it doesn't really work. Like, you can't educate crazy people. So what is your take on that? I mean, I have the right to be totally insane on my own Facebook page, but do I have the right to be that on the Facebook page of the major newspapers and TV stations?
I'll happily say, I think it's probably one of the waste of bandwidth, these commentary sections. I'm also one of the people who participate in these. I have to mention this. I do love them because I like discussing online. However, the problem I see it is that the problem is for us that actually care. Because it's a very small group. If you hang around, like, especially in Norway, Norwegian commentary section, you don't have to spend that much time there to find the sort of the 30 to 40 regulars who post every single day, under every single article, either to complain about Muslims or women, or both of them. You know, and for me to then dedicate my life to convince those seems like, you know, I will never convince those. I will probably never convince the other sort of maybe 1,500 to 2,000 other people who regularly post and upvote, you know, Muslims are bad, or you know, feminazis go to hell. But these 2,000 people are allowed to completely dominate our public discussion sphere. And I find that the rhetoric of journalists in particular seems to be very much shaped by their impression of being the comment section being the public. So that if there's a huge response in the comment section, doesn't matter that apparently it's like the 212 guys who were there yesterday as well. It's an outreach. So I personally believe that newspapers should leave internet debates to people who actually know it. People have proper forums, proper moderators, and channels that are actually good for discussion.
I don't want to say.
Yeah, and this is actually something that we have research on, how many people, I think, are in the commentary sections of Norwegian newspaper, like several days a week, and it's 2 to 3%, I think. So it's like, yes, it's not many people. My comment would be that I think that the commentary sections like they are now, they've been like this for like, I don't know, 10 years. There's not much innovation going on there, and it could be. It's like when you, I read about this Google award, there's like this 14-year-old girl that innovated this system where when you write like a harassing word in your comment, like or anything, then you get this question back, are you sure you want to post this? And what she found was that when you get this comment, 90% doesn't post it. So it's like a very easy psychology behind our internet behavior that it's not censoring people to actually ask that question. We can innovate things like that so that the commentary sections will actually be good debates without, you know, pushing out the 2-3%.
And I wanted to say that some companies are actually, so thank you for mentioning her Science Fair Award. I think it's also worthy of mention that it was a young woman of color who created it, which, you know, it just really was something I was really impressed, but I feel that it probably came from her own experience, and that broke my heart. She was 13 when that happened. She was creating something to address her own experience, but what some companies are doing is actually having symposia with other public media companies about the commenter problem because it's been such a problem. So when I worked at TED conferences, you know, the TED Talks, I worked there for a little bit. And when I worked there, they actually had a symposium where they invited people from all these other tech companies to talk about the comment section and how they could make it a better experience. And so I was very proud to work there and proud of them taking the lead on an issue like that and actually bringing minds in together to strategize. And so I heard, you know, algorithmic solutions that were talked about, as well as cultural solutions, moderation solutions, investment in moderators, etc. The other thing I'd like to say is, even though the comment section is usually a toxic place for me to be, I do make a habit of responding to people who are logical and rational, and then others who are not credible I do not respond to. But sometimes I think being able to have your space and to use that commentary as another place to promote positive rhetoric is really great. And so also there was a debate that I wrote in the New York Times. I participated in an opinion editorial, and there was someone basically who, I can shorten her op-ed response to mine about young feminists, that was basically like, this young generation just wants to wear short skirts, be Beyonce, and do TED Talks, and wear red lipstick, is what she said about us, and they don't do anything. And so, you can imagine we had a lot of feelings about that. And so, the bottom, in the comments section, some friends of mine actually came together, wrote their own op-ed in response about the divisive nature of elder feminists coming for younger ones, and posted that in the comments section and got about 1,000 responses of people engaging with it. So I think that the innovation piece is really important as well, but then also, finally I'll say that what you said about her science fair event, that is something that has also been built upon by a couple of companies, and so I've been hearing talk of other people, because she innovated that, who are thinking about adding that onto other tools. And YIPYAC, which is used often, a tool, I don't know if it's being used in Norway in this way, but it's a tool that's being used on campus a lot for harassing, and specifically women, and also survivors of rape on campus. And they now have something that comes up when you type in a keyword that says, you know, are you sure you want to write that? That's not very nice. Maybe you need to take a deep breath before you write it, which I think is a really good step forward.
Okay, we only have time for the last two questions of the persons who already have raised their hands. So.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure to hear all of you. I got inspired by Kristine, who mentioned that the police don't really have a good understanding of what racism, or what the people are reporting. So, and my experience is that the police don't really have a good understanding what is sexism, what is racism. Also, out of personal experience, I received extremely racist and sexist Facebook threat. And the police said, well, we don't really know if we can prosecute this, right, because we are not sure if this is racism. And it was just so racist, like there is, and no doubt. And so my question is, like, how can we make police and law enforcement better understand what people are reporting and what they're experiencing?
Well, I think we have a huge problem in thinking about threats in Norway, because in terms of threats, we never think of extremism. It is right-wing extremism that is the great challenge in Norway. People who hate women, anti-feminism and racism, that's the real threat, I believe. But apparently, not much of the police do that. But I do think that when it comes to these issues, it's all about just a little bit of will. I mean, if you had one task force, like say 3 people who actually know something about the internet, have read maybe one book about sexism and racism, they should be almost equipped enough to understand that if someone calls you, calls you a slut on the internet repeatedly, keep creating new accounts, that it is steps that is very possible and easy to take. I think we will have it as we're slowly building on the idea that what happens to us online affects us offline as well. That again, sort of the general public are still on the idea that the internet is far away, but as with more evidence you see that sexual harassment happens online, transfers offline, that online spaces are used to threaten people offline. I think that we will start to see more of a need to it. I don't think it's that far away. We're pushing for it everywhere we can.
The police have that group already. They were here this morning.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to comment.
Yes, sure.
The work is already
They're still here.
going.
They're still here.
Yeah.
They're still here.
Sorry,
I did not know that.
Hate crime group. Moderator. And what I heard, well, you can speak for yourself, but what I heard is that you also started to focus on hate speech, not only hate crime, which was the initial definition of your work. But we are excited to follow you in the future. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to discredit your work, but there is a problem and not being taken seriously. We apparently need more people like you.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, people that experience harassment are not living in Moderator, so they are all over the country, and they need local police force that, like you said, does not have knowledge, or not even like both on the harassment part or the racial and sexist part, but also on what you said, the actual, what is Twitter? Like, or you should just like leave the internet. Like, that's a comment that I heard a lot of journalists get, that you should just stay like quiet and don't speak that much like on the internet. And that's when it's people's livelihood. That's what you do, and that's like what all of us now have to do as part of our work. We're expected to be on the internet. Then that's not a solution. So
I had a U.S. police officer say that to me once when they came to my house about a rape threat and death threat, and he said, well, the person used the conditional tense, so because they didn't say they were going to kill you and rape you at 4:30 p.m. on this day, then we can't do anything about it. But then he also said, but if you just like stop saying these controversial things on the internet, then that's how you solve your problem. Thank you and good night. So I definitely think the education piece is really important.
We know that the hate crime unit, Monitored, is of course doing training of other police, and one of the most important things that the Ombud has been pushing for has been, and many other NGOs have been pushing for, has been the creation of a national plan, such that the types of hate crime unit that the Monitored is, that can come also into other police districts as well. So hopefully we may have something that may come about. Yeah.
Just a quick. I think we were also talking about how, of course, we need to have a legal solution. We need to have our criminal and justice system involved. I do think a lot of it has to do with the people who own the platforms. Like, I'm not sure I'm somehow supposed to feel kind of bad for Twitter. Like, they don't have. It's worth so many millions. These are big companies. There should be, even though if I'm not able to prosecute someone because he didn't tell me, at what point he was going to ring me, he just, hinted at it. There should still be a way for me to then put this up against the code of conduct. So I think a lot of it is not, a lot of this safety that we want has to do with the company that provide the platforms. That we shouldn't feel sorry for them. We shouldn't feel that it's an insurmountable task. It should just be that if this user spends most of their time threatening and harassing other users, he should not be allowed there. Their IP should be blocked forever, and there should be no apology about it. Yeah.
Last question.
Do we have two more?
No, it was just one.
Just one? Okay. Is there one over there? Didn't you want to ask?
Yeah, but I can ask tomorrow.
No, but
Sorry,
keep it brief.
No, it's okay.
Maybe we have time for both.
so
What
big.
do you think?
Yes, good question.
Because cyber world is very transnational or extraterritorial, I'm just wondering the issue of jurisdiction. If, for example, you report it to the police and it falls out of their jurisdiction, I know that's probably a lot to do with the application of law than just passing or giving recommendations. And the other question, very quickly, is about, for example, how minority women are kind of questioned. Because I come from Pakistan, and then you have this nationalist narrative. I can give the example of Malala Yousafzai, who's the recent development laureate. She's kind of considered the CIA agent who's doing the bidding of the Western world and bringing, Western agenda into Pakistan. And then she becomes a victim of attacks not only by men but also women, because you have this narrative really entrenched in the mindset of everybody. I'm just wondering if you've seen any difference between how, for example, minority women are questioned or attacked than, for example, here in Norway, because there is this nationalist mindset here too. So I'm just wondering, are there women who also attack women on these grounds? Thanks.
Kan dere bare samle opp den siste?
Yeah. That was a good idea.
Maybe really quick, thank you all. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how hate speech online affects how we speak to each other and about each other offline. Because I work with school communities and prevention of hate speech, and I've certainly seen how it changes how young people speak to each other and about other groups of people. Thank you.
I'll jump in really quick on that and one aspect of what I think you raised, and tell me if I didn't capture it correctly. Haven't seen the research on this myself. I know there is some research out there about the effects of cyberbullying in the workplace, things like that, but I mean, just completely anecdotally, you know the effect of having a conflictual conversation with someone who just treats you badly and then moving on to the rest of your day, right? I mean, it just affects things. It has to affect things. And there are really important questions to be asked about. I was speaking with someone about this last night. There's really important questions to be asked about the private activities of individuals who are also public employees, right? So school teachers, for example, who are engaged in basically extremist political orientations, views, they're Islamophobes or anti-Semitic or whatever. I think you really have to ask, not only is there some possibility that they're utilizing their association in this one place for having a voice in this other place, but also how can you have these views and not have them come in some way, whether you speak it or not, whether it's how you treat people in your classroom setting. How can there not be some sort of impact? Now, you still have to go prove it, but there's at least something to look at. I think you were raising a question about basically jurisdiction and territoriality and trying to deal with the flow of speech everywhere, right? And huge problems around observance of international law norms, right? If you're a jurisdiction that doesn't really pay too much attention to international law, that's a problem, but most of them tend to anyway, whether it's international human rights law or international trade agreements, things like that, most do. So this actually goes back to my story about the NBA. One way that creative strategy can be used of going after contract law, voluntary associations and stuff like that. The NBA is a multinational corporation, right? And it's doing business all over the world. So if you want to try to address certain things, and I think this is being done in a lot of cases, I think if you want to try to address certain things, you tie contracts and international business transactions together, say in a country that observes international human rights law, right? And say, if you're going to do business in our country, here's what we expect of you. You may not observe these norms in your own country, but we do here. And so if you're going to draw the benefit of operating your business here, you live by this. And I think that's some way to start to get around the jurisdictional issues and challenges.
Okay, I know what to say.
Yeah.
30 seconds. Yeah.
30 seconds. Okay, so one comment to your question about how minority women are approached. We don't know how much research on it, but in the interviews that I did, it becomes clear that minority women in Norway are in a special position where they are targeted from both sides, many sides. So they're targeted from the Norwegian main public, and then they're targeted from their own environments and own extremist groups. So that's like a double. So that's a special situation that we need to know more about. And to your question, it's important also to know that the research on hate speech, online harassment among children, youth, and students are a different field where you see that there's been done a lot on it, but you see there's different mechanisms where the harassers and the harassed change places. So they can be the same, and you also see how hate speech online actually spurs fighting, physical fighting offline. So it's a very close relation between offline and online in a different way than among adults.
We could go on, but I think we have to stop there. And I would like to thank you all for coming, and I would like to thank the 4 guests that we have here. Our guests from abroad.